Welcome to Art Ed Radio, the podcast for art teachers. This show is produced by the Art of Education, and I'm your host, Andrew McCormick. So I'm teaching the choice-based art education course this July, and it's been bringing up something that I've been thinking about for some time. You know, I'm not sure if Tim and I will be able to really flesh this out into a big episode on this topic, but I wonder about the efficacy and possible negative impacts on creating and using teacher examples. It's kind of a weird thought, but I'm wondering if Tim can kind of come on and help me flesh this out. Now, I understand that a teacher work example can be a guide for students, but I've been wondering if there's a drawback on student originality, as, you know, every student wants to make their artwork look just like ours. I think choice-based teachers probably use these teacher examples a little bit less, but it's still an issue with students using the internet and digital technology like YouTube or Pinterest. You know, those sites can inspire students, but are they just copying step-by-step tutorials and creating something that someone else tells them to do? You know, whether that's a teacher example or YouTube, I mean, don't get me wrong, YouTube tutorials can be great, but if a student is just making a dutiful copy of someone else's prescribed steps, is that original artwork? Now, on the flip side, doesn't everyone have to start somewhere? And I would say that nothing begets confidence and a renewed interest and commitment to the arts like having success in the arts. So maybe that's where having a teacher example can be really beneficial. So before I bring Tim on and have him help me kind of flesh out this conundrum, I want to remind you all again that the Art Ed Now conference is coming up in just a couple of weeks, August 3rd to be exact. And you've probably heard that Sir Ken Robinson is going to be giving the featured presentation, which is totally awesome. You can see all the details at artednow.com. But I also want to let you know that you need to be excited about the swag box, which should be arriving pretty soon if you're one of those first 1,500 people to register for the conference. Stabilo has included a set of their pins in the swag box, which is really awesome. They're really incredible. They're these like technical, stylish, well-designed pins, and they're really perfect for drawing. I actually got a chance to use them a little bit at the AOE retreat last month, and I really enjoyed them. Shannon Bell is going to be giving a presentation on Stabilo pins and how they can be used in your drawing classes. And let me tell you, you're going to want to see these pins yourself and have your students probably use them every single day. They're innovative, high-quality pins, and you're totally going to love them. So make sure you check out Stabilo at the conference and also in your swag box. All right, so let's bring on Tim and see what he thinks about using teacher examples. All right, so Tim, thanks for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, man. I am excited to talk to you.
You know, it is going to be kind of a bit of a bizarre episode, as, you know, this idea of a demonstration conundrum, you know, what to do about demos and teaching work samples. It's been gnawing on me kind of for a while now. And in some ways, I think this episode's kind of a choice-based episode. And it's, you know, it comes up a lot in the choice-based art ed class that I'm teaching right now and that I've taught from time to time. And it's what to do about teacher samples. And we think specifically, you know, does making a teacher example help kids, you know, stay on track because they've got a visual target? Or do you think in some ways that can hinder their own creativity and encourage them to just kind of imitate you? So just right off the bat, let me throw you into the fire. Where do you sit on that kind of divide? Is it helpful, or do you think it actually hinders students' creativity?
Oh man, can I say both? Like,
yeah, sure.
I think there are a lot of benefits to having a finished demo piece. I think it can be an important part of scaffolding, especially when kids aren't really ready to be super creative. They aren't ready to generate their own ideas. I think it can be a learning piece, and I think it can be helpful because, like you said, they have an idea of what they can be going for, and they can put their own spin on it, ideally. And you would hope that it's not just kids looking at that and copying that. And I think, you know, some of the issue with that falls back on the teacher, where you need to make it clear that this is just an example. This is not what you're going for. This is, you know, one possible solution. This is what I came up with, but you need to come up with your own. But at the same time, I'm not going to let you talk yet. Just hang on.
Okay. I was ready, man. I wanted to jump in there.
At the same time, I have never been opposed to those teachers who do not want to put up work samples. And I was the same way. I did not want to do that, because I think it does, hinder kids' creativity a little bit, because they focus so much, as much as you may want to tell them, this is not what you need to come up with, especially younger kids or kids who haven't had a lot of art experience. That is what they come up with. They will do things that are very similar. So I can see where it will, kind of hinder creativity as well. And so I'm with you where I think it is a little bit of a conundrum where, I can see both sides of the issue.
Yeah. And I like that approach. And I think we're both going to have some kind of like, I can see it both ways. And I think it kind of depends. One of the things as you were talking that came up to in my mind is when it's really helpful is when I do have a struggling student. I remember in high school absolutely hating when my teacher would draw on my work, unsolicited. She would notice a mistake and like, oh, let me fix this for you. It's like,
that is the worst. That is the worst.
Right.
But anyway, go on.
And but there are some kids who actually kind of want that. They're like, oh no, go ahead, fix this whole thing for me. And when you have an example that is your own, that maybe you kind of did a little technique on the side and you showed them some things and you're kind of working on it when there's some downtime. When you see a student who is struggling with something, a technique or an idea, you can say, well, let me show you what I mean again on my own example. So you're not doing it over theirs. You're kind of doing it parallel to them. And that's where I can see it being really helpful. And again, I think it's like how the teacher approaches it. If you put it up and say, no one would do this. This is exactly what I want. Of course, that's going to hinder creativity. But if it's just kind of a guiding light or an example for you to mess around with, I mean, that's great. But I want to get to something. You kind of said it depends on the teacher. And I wonder if you could maybe agree with me here. I just want you to agree with me. Just say yes. I think that there's two different groups of teachers that this becomes especially like tricky for. I think choice-based teachers are really interested in this, and it seems really easy to, as your going choice to just say, I don't need those at all because everyone's choice-based. And then I also think that there's a divide between elementary teachers and secondary teachers. Elementary teachers, I think, kind of by their nature enjoy this example idea. Because maybe the structure of elementary is there's more one and done type projects, and secondary teachers, we can let them stew in their own stuff for a while. Do you see those groups as being like really grappling with this idea a lot?
All right, I think you asked about 7 questions there, but let me try and go through and answer a few things here. If I can just circle back around to kind of what you were talking about before you asked that question and showing kids, how you struggle with things. As you know, I'm a huge proponent of sketchbooks, and I think that's a great way to work out a lot of issues. And I always have my own sketchbook, somewhere in the room, and I love breaking that out for kids and saying, hey, look at this page. Here's where I struggled with this. Here's how I solved that. And I think that works really well for high school, and probably works really well for middle school too, because kids can grasp that. Plus, you're seeing the same kids every day, so you can kind of work through those problems with them on a more regular basis. So I think that's why, secondary teachers probably don't need these examples as much. But then in that question, if we compare that to elementary, you hit on a couple things where there are a lot more one and done projects. You're not seeing kids as often when you're teaching elementary, and you need to get through things a little more quickly. And unfortunately, because of those time constraints and just because of all of the logistics, you aren't able to have kids reflect and kind of go through that artistic process as slowly and as carefully as you would like. And so in that case, I think these examples are really important because they can do a lot for you in just a little bit of time. Like, most of our kids are visual learners, and if they can see exactly what you're talking about, or if you can point out specific examples in what you've done already, that sort of speeds up the learning process, which is a necessity when you're at the elementary level. So I can see why there is a little bit of a divide between elementary and secondary. And so, yeah, I think there is, and I think it's justified as well. As far as choice-based, I've never taught choice-based, so I don't know that I can or should speak too much to that. But I think it does go back to, if it is student-centered learning and individualized learning, hey, you are going to need to spend a lot of time as a teacher just kind of talking through with them, all of the possible solutions, and just make sure you're attentive to what they're doing and helping them through that learning process, even if you don't have those examples up there.
Well, and, I agree with you. And I think one of the things we'll kind of suss out here in the next few minutes is there's probably a difference between a teacher work example or a teacher example and then a demonstration. And some demonstrations turn into teacher examples if they're like a really quick kind of 1-day lesson.
Yeah.
And sometimes demos are just, okay, here's how you do this. And then you just throw that thing away. It was like, you just kind of had to see me watch this, and maybe I'll leave up this little 5-minute thing. But I do think we will have to kind of differentiate between those a little bit. But let me circle back to big picture here. Is this just the dumbest argument in the world to even be having? Because I think about like math teachers. Math teachers don't give a crap if like their students solve equations exactly how they do it. So what is it about us as art teachers that like we get all kind of worked up about, am I doing this right? Or how much am I doing it? Or how deliberate or intentional am I using my examples?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I don't know, like, our teachers are really good at self-reflection, but we're also really good about worrying about some of the dumbest stuff. And I agree that this may fall under that category too. But I think it just comes back to the, what works for you question, because, we want our students to come up with individual ideas, and, we need to do that as well as teachers. And so just thinking about your own classroom, thinking about how you teach individually, is your teaching better if you have an example on the board, or is your teaching better if you're sitting down and talking to students one-on-one about the creative process, about how to solve these problems? And, when I taught elementary, I think my teaching was probably better when there was an example on the board, because like I said before, you're going through so many different ideas and you're seeing so many different students that it's really easy to, just point out and reference, hey, see what I did here, in one certain spot. But, when I taught high school, I think I was a better teacher not having examples. And so that's why I kind of gave them up, because I wanted to focus more on one-on-one, interactions with kids. So, long story short, no, I don't think we need to worry about it. I think we need to just do what's best for us and not worry about if it's the quote unquote right way to do things.
I like that approach. And, there's lots of solutions out there. There's, the mini lessons, the flipped instruction lessons. If you're going choice-based, you can kind of show students, you can do this, this, or this. Without kind of saying you can do this and then this is the desired end result, thereby kind of squashing a lot of their creativity. There's boot camps. There's lots of different ways, but I like your approach of like every teacher needs to kind of decide like what strategy is making me most effective with my students. That's a good approach. So let's switch it up here a little bit. We've been talking kind of teacher example, teacher example, teacher example. Let's talk now about demonstration and how that can actually be tricky. Yeah. I want to kind of set the stage for you a little bit. Our students, the majority of their day, they're told to sit and be quiet and passively get knowledge and learning poured into them. And then you have this art class where it's freedom and it's creativity and it's expression. And then as art teachers, we all do this thing where it's like, okay, come on up to this table for the next 10 minutes as I'm going to show you stuff and you need to be quiet, right? Yeah. And They're like, gosh, more of the same. And I just remember back to my days of being an elementary teacher. By the time I get them in, do a little anticipatory thing and then demo, it's like, oh my gosh, we've got 20 minutes left to make capital A art that's meaningful. And it was just like, So I struggled for years as an elementary teacher trying to figure out ways to get my demonstrations faster, leaner, meaner, so that I wasn't sending all my students home with like half finished artwork. That drove me crazy. Okay, so that's me setting the stage, right? So here's the question to you. Do you have some ideas, strategies, tips, tricks for teachers out there to streamline their demos so they're not frustrated like I was all those years?
Yeah. Again, I think it just kind of needs to go back to what makes you most effective. And so I think, I can relate to some of the issues that you're talking about, because when I was teaching elementary, I was always searching for more time. And when I switched to secondary, that was more my thing, because the slower pace and seeing kids every day allows you to really sort of develop ideas over a longer amount of time. You can show just a little bit every day and let your kids get to work. And so I think that's a little bit more effective. But not everyone has that luxury, I know. And so I think the biggest thing that you can do, or two of the biggest things you can do, is number one, just cut it down or pare it down to just the most essential information, where, if go through your demonstration, say, can I cut this out? Will my students be okay if they don't learn this? And obviously you don't want to neglect too many things when it comes to skill building or craft or technique. But at the same time, you need to give kids time to create. And I think the second thing, and probably a more important part of this that I think gets overlooked a lot, is that scaffolding is so important. Where, if you get clay out, you can say, hey guys, remember last time we did ceramics, we talked about this, this, and this. And that way you don't need to demonstrate those things over and over again. If they already have that knowledge and you're scaffolding and you're building on that previous knowledge, it can save you so much time when it comes to demonstrations. So if you can refer back to things that you've done before, refer back to things that you've taught already, that can save you so much time when you are demoing. So just kind of think about that. Think about how you can build on prior knowledge that your kids already have, and that can be a huge time saver.
Okay, let me ask you this question. Let's say that you have like 4 steps of you got to do this, and then you got to do this. Remember to do this, and then finally do this. And that is going to take about 8 minutes. And that your students have about an attention span of like 90 seconds, right? After about the first 90 seconds, they're going to be like, can we just make art already? So, okay, do you just forge ahead and just tell them up front, like, listen, I know I got to talk a little bit more than normal today. It's going to take me 7-8 minutes. I know you can do it. Sit tight. Or do you try to break up your demonstrations and do like, okay, I'm going to show you a couple steps. Then you guys can work for a while. And then when I see enough people ready for like the next couple steps, I'll bring you back up again. And I ask that because every time you have a large group of people, 30 students or something, moving around the room, putting their work on hold, it's a little bit herky-jerky. So which one would you prefer?
Now, personally, I always prefer the former approach. Like, I always appreciate being proactive. I always like telling kids, hey, this demo is going to take a little longer than normal. I appreciate your attention, and just kind of set the expectations of what they need to do to listen, what they need to do to remember or take notes or whatever you need from them. Set those expectations before you even get started. And then you don't feel as bad about, taking up a little more time, and kids aren't as anxious if they know that you're going to be talking a little bit longer. So the proactive approach works for me. But I definitely don't mind, breaking it up into multiple steps where once you guys go back to your table and do X, Y, and Z, and like you said, when enough people are done, we'll kind of move on. And those kids that are a little bit slower can talk to their friends about, oh, hey, I missed that. What do I need to do? And you can sort of spread it out a little bit more. And I think that's effective. But, for me, it is a little bit too chaotic to get people up and down, moving around constantly. So I see the benefits of it, especially if you have a class with shorter attention spans. But just on a personal level, I definitely like the proactive approach, setting expectations and then taking just a little bit longer for the demo.
Yeah, it's always tough. And I've had bigger class sizes than I'm used to. And one of the things I used to do, that presents a whole nother problem is like, maybe your first row of kids can kind of see, and then can anyone else in the back see, and then they start to lose attention. I used to do this in elementary school where I would kind of demonstrate for half of the class.
Yeah.
While the other half had like a duty or a task that they were working on. And the understanding was, well, okay, and then we'll flip flop. But like, if you're working on your stuff, like, you got to be really quiet so I can have this demonstration conversation with this other half of the class. And it worked pretty well. I mean, there's pros and cons to that too, which is, you're saying everything twice. It's sometimes a little trickier for that group that's sitting down to like really be quiet, but sometimes that kind of works. The other thing I've started doing, and people who listen to this podcast, and this as well, I can be a little bit long-winded, and I realized that this year students were coming into my classroom like, you have to talk today. I'm like, yes, I have to talk. I actually have to like give you some, knowledge and some content and some feedback. And I started using my phone as a little timer, and I would tell kids like, okay, I'm going to talk for 6 minutes. I know you guys get talked at way longer in your other classes, so I know you can bear with me for 6 minutes while I demonstrate this thing. And I would set my phone up, and it really helped me, like, boom, I'm done at 5:40, like, hey, look, I even gave you guys 20 extra seconds. And that was really helpful for me. I don't know if other teachers kind of do that, or if you've done something like that at all.
I have not done something like that, but I like it. I like the idea of just telling kids, hey, this is how long I'm going to take. And, I think that gives them, like you said, a little more incentive to pay attention. Although there's one thing that I always like to do where I would demo for one class, and then the next section of that same class would come in, and I would tell kids, just about exactly how, like, I'm going to talk for about 3 minutes and 37 seconds here. And then some kids would time and see like how close I got to that. Yeah. It was usually pretty close because, you're doing the same kind of demo again. That's always entertaining. But as you were talking, another thought crossed my mind. There's always space there if you have the technology for it to flip some of your demos and some of your lessons as well. So, it's easier to split the kids up into groups. It's easier to, just kind of demo things over and over without wearing yourself out, without worrying too much about logistics. And so I would encourage people to do that as well, just to make sure that you can be consistent with things, make sure that you can handle classroom management the way it needs to be done. And so, I mean, that's an option that's always worth looking into as well.
Yeah, I like that idea. I've done a lot of that with my sort of like graphic design or digital photography. I struggle a little bit more with like hands-on demos, but I think it's important for me to do that because I've noticed this thing. If I have 4 classes that are all the same and I'm going to get 4 demos, every class, it actually gets a little bit longer and longer and longer because I keep coming up with like, oh, I didn't say that, or, oh, I never even thought of this problem, but in second hour, someone did this, and please don't do that. So
yeah,
it's unfortunate because by, the 4th time, you're like, gosh, I've added an extra 3 minutes onto this 6-minute demo that I had to give, and that's not cool. And I think that's where flipping would really help out. But hey, man, let me kind of circle back and kind of wrap this up because we've been talking for a while on this. So let's just kind of agree that we're all going to have some sort of, demonstration or teacher example. Can you give us some last minute parting words again on kind of like how to use it well, and minimize maybe some of the unintended negative consequences that can come out with a teacher example or over demonstrating things?
Yeah, I would say as far as words of advice, just spend some time reflecting on what you're doing with demos, what you're doing with examples, and more importantly, why you're doing it that way. Because we talked earlier about how, different teachers are going to have different approaches, and you need to figure out what works for you because, it's dependent on the level that you're teaching, what type of project you're doing, your approach to teaching, your classroom management skills, what type of kids you have. And so I don't think there's one hard and fast rule that's going to work for everybody. And so my advice would be just to think deeply about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And maybe you come to the conclusion that these examples are needed, or these type of demos are needed. And that's when you're going to be most effective, or that's when you're going to be at your best as a teacher. And so once you kind of come up with that conclusion, you can tailor your teaching, your examples, your demonstrations accordingly. But, just figure out what works best for you, what works best for your students, and go with that.
Right on. Well put, man. I really appreciate it. And thanks for coming on and kind of humoring me on this bizarre, weird conundrum that I've been perplexed with for a while.
I think it's definitely worth talking about. Just like we said, you're reflecting on it right now like everybody else should do. And, your teaching's going to improve because of it. So anyway, thanks for having me on.
Yep. We'll see you, Tim. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Thanks to Tim for coming on and being the voice of reason and helping me kind of wrap my brain around why this has been kind of bugging me. There really isn't a right or wrong answer. And like Tim said, we say this a lot. It's going to require some honest reflection and individualization to make it right for you and in your classroom. Now, I don't use a one-size-fits-all sort of approach to this. Even last year, there were times in my classroom where I totally used a teacher example. The end product was still pretty open-ended though, but my finished piece was there and it showed my interpretation of the process. Then there were other times where I didn't really use any examples at all. Just, a few quick demos, and the guiding light on how to interpret it was up to the students to come up with. If I had to pin down my own thoughts on this though, I think it would be this. Less is more. But there's got to be some sort of happy medium. It's why I mostly have half-finished demos around the room. I don't want my artwork to look too good or too finished that students misinterpret it for more than what it is. Just my process, not something that they should aspire to produce. Art Ed Radio is developed, produced, and supported by the Art of Education with audio engineering by Michael Crocker. For fans of the podcast out there, do us a favor and give us a ranking or glowing review on iTunes, as this totally helps us find new listeners out there. As always, new episodes of Art Ed Radio are released every Tuesday, and additional content can be found under the podcast tab on theartofed.com. All right, thanks for listening.